The Brooklyn Nets come up short as the winning streak comes to an end at 12 on the road in Chicago. We break down the big performance from Kevin Durant, the lack of support from the role players, and really a game that from start to finish just felt like a team in Brooklyn that never quite got in sync.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. While Doug Norrie may not be here, he still remains the owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And unfortunately, something that we knew would eventually happen, the Brooklyn Nets were going to lose another game. Just one loss in the month of December. They pick up their first loss in the month of January and their first loss of the new year at the hands of the Chicago Bulls on the road. We're going to kind of talk about, I think, some of the things that you saw early in this game that were maybe the seeds of some problems that they were going to have. Some of the matchup issues, certainly. But really, as we said at the top, at the highest level, this was just about kind of that recipe of success that they've had in place over the course of this winning streak and over the course of much of this season never got into place and never found its rhythm behind a really big performance from Kevin Durant. And we do start there. Kevin Durant obviously was still doing his thing as he typically is in this one. When you go inside that box score and you realize that he's giving you that 44-point performance and he's doing it on 15 of 22, 5 of 10 from beyond the arc, got to the line 9 times, took care of every single one of those, and gave you 4 rebounds, 5 assists to go along with a steal, 2 blocks, few turnovers, and as I say, 44-point performance. But the interesting thing, even inside of those numbers, it is worth noting that we've talked about over the course of this winning streak, there's been fourth quarters where Kevin Durant hasn't had to play at all, but there's also been several games. In this one, he goes 38 minutes trying to find a way there in the fourth quarter to get the Nets back into this one. But when you go back and we look over some of these recent games for him, again, knowing that he was able to rest in a lot of these late, but 14 attempts over San Antonio, 15 against Charlotte, 17 against Atlanta, 18 against Cleveland, 17 against Milwaukee. He hasn't taken 22 shots in a game. Ironically, going back to what was a win for the Brooklyn Nets, but on December 18th, which I actually tweeted out during this one because it was the last time that Kevin Durant had a 40-point game. This was his biggest scoring performance since that 43-point outing against Detroit, but it came in a winning effort, which obviously is the most important part of this narrative when we talk about how the Brooklyn Nets have manufactured some in-game rest for Kevin Durant, how they've had this give and take with him and Kyrie Irving. There were some instances of it, but at a high level, this game was reminiscent of games from last season where everything looked like throughout the first 3+ quarters, right? Everything looked like it was going to come down to can Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, however it was going to shake it out. But when you look at the box score and you just the game flow, Kevin Durant was really the one who was getting to his spots and finding his shots with consistency. He had his imprint all over this game. It looked like one of those heavy lift, either Kevin Durant's going to do it or the Nets are going to lose, right? And the contrast between those types of performances a season ago versus the way they've played now is really what's been the recipe for their winning streak and for their success. Because we said it last season, even early a little bit this year too, sometimes, the idea of knocking Kevin Durant in any way, shape, or form, it feels almost sacrilege. But when he gets the sense that it's going to be either all on his shoulders or nothing, and it's the right sense to have in this game, it gets into that ISO possession. It gets into those downhill attacks, and a lot of times it's still going to result in a great look from him or, a quality look for him by his standards, even when he's in between 3 defenders at stretches in this game, even when they are throwing collapsing defenses at him. But then that becomes the driving force inside of the game. And it starts to mitigate the value of the floor spacing, of some of those second chance opportunities, the second and third passes off of those blitzing defenses at times. And Chicago did a good job, especially when you came out in the second half. There was big stretches where they tried to do everything to deny the ball getting into Kevin Durant's hands. We'll talk a little bit about what happened with the supporting cast here, which is another key factor as well. But these are the types of games you don't want to see. Now, we know that Kevin Durant taking 22 shots in this game, but if he had taken 15 or 16 and the Nets lose by 7 points, would you be sitting here saying Kevin Durant needs to take over these games? I think that the winning streak has been enough, right? They've accomplished enough over the last 12 games, over the last, 19-3, over the last 22 games, now 19-4 over their last 23. I think they've shown enough that it's okay for them to lean on the recipe, to lean on what's worked for them, and to say, hey, on a given night, a good team, a team like Chicago, who's certainly not had the season they were hoping for, but obviously has talent on this roster. If they're gonna beat us, they're going to beat us. But we don't want to get out of character. You don't want to push the panic button and completely pivot away from what has been successful for you over this run. But ultimately, the Nets do come up short in this game, and we'll stretch it out here just a little bit because there's some other things inside of this one too. Early in this, it was mentioned on the broadcast that you looked at a team in Chicago who is, I think, either dead last or near last in the league in terms of three-point attempts, but they do knock it down at the 11th best rate. So there's kind of this, they're selective. They're not necessarily going to be pouring them in from the perimeter. And yet there are those times when they're going to be able to knock them down successfully. Now, the funny thing is they end up going 8 of 20 from beyond the arc after I think at one point in this game being 6 of 11 from deep. So they had it going a little bit early. They were finding some of those open looks. And you go inside. Listen, the one thing we'll get out of the way right here, right now. Yes, the refereeing in the first half was a lot to take, right? And there's not often times when Doug or myself are going to sit on an episode and say, because of what the referees did, because of certain calls, that's why the Brooklyn Nets lost this game. And guess what? I'm not going to say it here tonight either, because even in those instances, you gave up 69 points in the first half. And we're going to talk about that coming up. But ultimately, when you turn around and you see the free throws are 21-29 in favor of the Chicago Bulls, they knocked down 93% of the line. Nets knocked down just 16 of those 21 looks there. There's obviously the turnovers that I thought were a big part of this as well. 24 assists for the Nets on 42 made field goals. So you don't hate it. You obviously don't love the 91 attempts and only knocking down 46%. And I say only because the Nets have also been hitting their shots at such a high percentage there. And you couple that with really a disastrous performance from beyond the arc. There is one name that we'll talk about here specifically. But by and large, this game just right from the first tip had all the sense of, boy, it does not look like the rhythm and the continuity that we've seen over this 12-game winning streak was going to carry over. And we'll dive in a little bit deeper. But obviously, at that high level, a 44-point performance from Kevin Durant, you want to make sure that we always talk about rewarding supporting cast members and how that it's a two-way street, right? You want the Seth Currys, the Royce O'Neals, the Joe Harrises, the TJ Warrens of the world to reward Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving when they distribute, when they make that extra pass. And same thing here. You want to reward the Kevin Durant performance by stepping up, showing up in those key moments, and helping get a victory so you don't waste 38 minutes on Kevin Durant. It isn't the case here, though, and ultimately the Nets do fall, as we know, against the Chicago Bulls, 121-112. So let's get into a little bit of where this game script kind of went right from the get-go, some of the adjustments the Nets tried to make, and ultimately just a game that did not feel like they were going to be able to get over the hump. But before we do that, we're going to tell you about our old friends, my friends, at, wouldn't you know it, Built Bar. That is right. What makes Built Bar so good? Oh, I'll tell you. For starters, they have 100% covered in real chocolate. That's always a delicious way to begin when you're going to grab yourself a protein bar, and it's real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. I'm not sure how Built Bar does it. We talked about it before. We talk about how Doug Norrie has family members in the house that are clamoring when the boxes show up, and they are taking these things down left, right, and center. But they taste like a candy bar while still being packed with amazing proteins and stat lines like 130 grams of calories. That's right, just 130 grams of calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait around to get a box. For years, we've been talking about the outstanding Built Bars at BuiltBar.com. Now you can get them on your local Walmart or Sam's Club. How about that? Wander into a Walmart, stumble down the aisle. Instead of grabbing one of those gross candy bars, you can reach out and grab yourself a Built Bar. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today. Walk to the pharmacy section. See, don't even go over that candy. Head over to the pharmacy. Grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick them up in a 4-box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or my personal favorite, the coconut puffs. If you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie, batter, and churro. You can thank me later. Speaking of thanking me later, you're not going to thank me later for breaking down what didn't work out for the Brooklyn Nets in this one. So we said right out of the gate, and this is one of those things too, when you're sitting there, or at least as Doug and I usually do, you start to kind of notate what's working, things that are going well. And over a 12-game winning streak, by and large, you're just kind of saying, hey, the passes are there, the fluidity is there, the consistency is there. In this one, it really was, to me, it felt like in a lot of ways that the teams were, or at least Chicago, was mirroring the things. And I don't mean that they were trying to mirror what the Nets were doing to them, but just kind of the things that have been successful for Brooklyn, right? The extra passes, the floor spacing, the access into the paint. And then even when you talk about, and we will mention Vucevic and his stat line here, when it got on the interior, though, it was the little extra drop-off passes that were available. It was certainly some of the second chance opportunities that happened there. The offensive rebounds played a factor in this as well. But in so many ways on Chicago's side of it, and I said this about looking inside these box scores, right? So just quickly here, we know Kevin Durant, 44-point performance. Kyrie Irving ends up throwing in a 25-point performance, but he does start kind of one of the negative trends inside of this game that we'll get to in a second. After that, though, it's a nice performance from Nicholas Claxton. It looked like when you thought this team could surge, he dialed it in. He became kind of that irritant underneath Vucevic's skin for a couple of possessions, had a couple of big blocks in this one, obviously 3 in total. So there were those moments. But so his night's good. It's solid, right? 11-point performance, 6 rebounds to go along, 2 assists, a steal, and then the 3 blocks, as I mentioned there. But then nobody else, really. Nobody else. We're going to get to one key guy, one man off the bench, but so much about the Nets' success has been about a solid, consistent, easy performance from Kevin Durant, and then all that supporting cast really stepping up in a big way. And we'll get back to that in a second. But first, when you flip over to Chicago, this is exactly what I think works so well for them. Because at the end of the game here, DeRozan has a handful of shots that he kind of, buries this one, puts it away for Chicago. But look inside the box score for them. You get a 22-point performance for DeRozan, most of the work being done late in the closing moments, as you want that to be the case. Zach LaVine only has 13 points, going 4 of 11 in 36 minutes. Dosunmu, he ends up showing up, though, with 17 points on 7 of 14 from the field. Vucevic, 8 of 12, easy access in and around the paint, 21 points for him to go with his 13 rebounds. And then, though, Williams was 6 of 8, 3 of 4 from beyond the arc, 7 of 7 at the line. He gives you 22 points. So you've got 3 out of your 5 starters over 20 points, every starter in double digits. And then you go on top of that, Kobe White goes 3 of 6 from the field off the bench, a 10-point performance. You get 14 points combined between Jones and Dragic off the bench as well, a combined 3 of 3 there actually for Jones. So selective but effective. It's just, this has been the kind of balanced performance that we've seen from the Brooklyn Nets in their starting rotation and then down into their bench. Always kind of who's going to step up next here. Over the last handful of games, we saw kind of that Royce O'Neal and that TJ Warren energy coming down the pike here. And then what you want to have is the ebb and flow and pushing back the other way. Now, there's some key things that I thought didn't work here for the Brooklyn Nets inside of this game from a flow standpoint. I mentioned at the top there in the first segment, 69 points in the first half. So you end up giving up another, 50 points there over the second 2 quarters of the second half of this game here. In the third quarter, though, you won it 26-19. Like, you closed the gap. You were down by 10. You made it a ball game going to the fourth, but then you surrender another 33 points there. So you ultimately end up giving 52 points in the second half. And in the first half of this game, I just thought the things that weren't working defensively were some of the rotations. And again, the decision around how are you going to defend some of these weapons? Early on, you saw Claxton picking up Zach LaVine. I thought that, those are plus matchups there that you can look to because Claxton has the length. If you get caught on a switch, you like maybe Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons picking it up. But what seemed to happen with consistency was Williams just kept getting lost and kind of left out there. Now, a big part of that is the byproduct of DeRozan and having to pay attention to him. He's a difficult matchup for the Brooklyn Nets. He's the kind of one where when you get him down in there into switches, and we know he's playing up at the forward, up at the three, but if you get those switches down onto one of the guards, it's going to become an issue for the Brooklyn Nets. It's not going to be a matchup for Kyrie Irving. It's going to be something where you're looking maybe at a Royce O'Neal. And then in this one as well, if we talk about kind of key factors, Yuta Watanabe, if we are going to look at the referees and say, what was the big way that it impacted the game? 2 of his first 3 fouls made it a whopping 3 minutes in this one before having to go to the bench. 2 of those first 3 fouls were very suspect at best, right? And they came trying to defend against DeMar DeRozan. And we've liked so much beyond his shooting for Yuta Watanabe, it's been kind of his flexibility on both ends of the floor, right? And especially defensively. He does a great job of being able to sprint out and get on the perimeter, close out some of those looks. He's done a good enough job, especially in defense, staying in front of players, affecting their shots, following them to rim without taking fouls. You could see, in spite of the big smile on his face, there was frustration there. And I do think that him coming out of the game, him not being a weapon that you could go to, is more even on the defensive end. I think the size matters overall in this game, but defensively, some of that flexible value, I actually think that really did some damage to them on that end of the floor. But again, this felt solely about what happened in terms of, I mentioned this at the top, mirroring the game and style that the Brooklyn Nets have had so successfully. And that comes from Dragic. It comes even from LaVine. It comes from DeRozan. DeRozan in this game, just 3 assists. But again, you look through it, and Dragic came in after, ironically, a guy that I've talked about and said the Nets should be interested in if Chicago was going to start to look to maybe dismantle this thing a little bit. And they're not going to. 17-21 now. They're going to hang in here and believe that they have veterans and talented players that can turn this thing around for them on the back half of this season. But Caruso, who's the guy I said, hey, you want to watch for him, he goes out with the injury. And as people have pointed out, that's one of the concerns around him. So, it's a valid one to bring back up here. He checks out, though, and then Dragic ends up playing 17 minutes and gives you 6 assists. So he comes in and takes on a little of that facilitator role. You get a little bit more probably from White in this one than in the absence of Caruso, and he provides some of that scoring pop there. But through the starting unit here, 2, 3, 3, 4, 1 assist, like, it's just, again, so much of what they did was just about spacing. It was just about spacing and access. And the perimeter shots, there was only 20 of them, but they hit enough of them. And then so much of it's predicated on the mid-range game. And I know fans are going to talk about Vucevic and the 8 of 12, and it's accurate. Gets on the interior. And my pushback on not whether or not he's talented, not whether or not he could have been the answer for the Brooklyn Nets or whatever you may think, it's more about denying the access. Like, that's the thing that really bothered me in this game defensively, is you weren't positioning yourself to deny the access to Vucevic down in the paint. Because once he's there, then, he's only 6'10", but the size, he's a thick player. Him against Nicholas Claxton, who did step up late in this game and have some moments, or against the Ben Simmons, it was more about the rotations. It was more about fronting him and denying the easy pass into the paint and then providing, really, again, 8 of 12, all the looks in close, no hard work for really Vucevic in this game in terms of his scoring opportunities. The Nets didn't adjust to that in a way that I thought was significant. And again, the lack of Watanabe, now all of a sudden you're worried a little bit about Williams hanging out there on the perimeter, knocking down some of those shots. He's playing at 6'7", 6'8", so there's just enough size there to be a problem in the switching and mismatches that create. And once you fall behind in this game, which the Brooklyn Nets trailed, I think from 8-7 was the only lead they had in this one. Once you fall behind, and we've talked about this being a problem for other teams that have to adjust to you, once you fall behind, well, now you want to go to your perimeter shooters. You want to we're going to talk about the bench here and Seth Curry. You want to go to Joe Harris. And while we like Joe Harris's size, it becomes a more difficult lift here to try to come from behind, giving more offensive power and then surrendering some of the value on the defensive end. And that comes down to, which we're going to discuss in a second, the performance from Royce O'Neal contrasted by the performance of Seth Curry. And again, the supporting cast, the role players, and what you did not get from them in this game. We'll break that all down here coming up in a second. But before we do, we're going to have to tell you, not because we have to, because we want to, about our friends over at LinkedIn. LinkedIn, of course. Maybe if you are a fan who thinks that the Nets got jobbed by the refs in this first half, you could be looking to hire a private investigator, hire someone with some security experience to get out there and protect these Brooklyn Nets against the onslaught from the refs. Well, LinkedIn Jobs has you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open job with targeting tools. They go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post, company, and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates as possible. You can identify the most qualified candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect with them fast and all for free as well. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to screen and rate applicants based on your job qualifications, all on one platform. Do you know the difference between a foul and a non-foul? Maybe you're actually looking to hire better referees. The NBA could look into this potentially, especially with the way this game went tonight. But this is why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions, why they do apply. All right, closing it out here then. This is what we were talking about at the top. The theme of this, not wasting the Kevin Durant performance. And over a stretch here, we had guys like Royce O'Neal and guys like TJ Warren stepping up in big ways. But in this game, that was not necessarily the case. By the way, TJ Warren had a collision late in this one, went right back to the locker room. So we will look to hear more from that over the next couple of days. But this could be the first, it's the first night when the Nets had every single player available and healthy for them. So, of course, someone had to go down. We'll see what comes of TJ Warren. Obviously, you're going to want to be cautious around that as well. But a guy like Royce O'Neal. So we talk about and we love what Royce has been for this Brooklyn Nets team. And we look back over this last stretch of games, right? Because essentially, starting back with the Detroit game on December 18th, ironically, that last big performance from Kevin Durant, he's put up performances shooting 66, 71, 66, 66, 50, and 71% from the field. Combining that with 75, 66, 62, 67, 25%. One outlier bad performance from beyond the arc, but everything else has been beautiful from him. He shot in the month of December, 47% from beyond the arc, 47% from the field overall. Incredibly consistent, incredibly reliable, and it coupled so nicely with what he was doing on the defensive end and the value and size that he brings. 35 minutes, 0 of 9 from the field, 0 of 8 from beyond the arc, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 personal fouls, 0 points for Royce O'Neal. That is a killer, especially early in this game. He started 0 of 3 from beyond the arc and 0 of 3 in that first quarter. So in those early sequences, when we talk about the Nets having success and the supporting cast rewarding Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving for making the extra feeds, it just was not there for him. Now you can make the case here. If we want to talk about, by the way, Eastern Conference Coach of the Month, Jacques Vaughn. If we want to talk about whether or not he should have tried to pull the cord on Royce O'Neal a little bit sooner, he's done a nice job kind of pivoting to a second or third option often. Maybe the Yuta Watanabe was the play. And then when he gets into that early foul trouble, it kind of takes that off the table for you. We'll take I'll bring this up at the end of the episode. Jacques Vaughn had a interesting quote in the pregame when he was named the Eastern Conference Coach of the Month for December. So that's Royce O'Neal, though. Then you turn it around, and just from a perimeter shooting standpoint, I said, well, Kyrie Irving went 10 of 24 from the field overall. You'd say it's all right. It wasn't a stellar performance. You can look at just the points and say 25 points on the night. By the way, he did carry the worst plus minus on the team at minus 14 in this one of 8 from beyond the arc. Now, some of those come in the fourth quarter, like Royce O'Neal, when he's taking those last, I think he had 1 or maybe 2 in the fourth quarter. There was no world where they were going down. Not a chance. Ian Eagle said in the broadcast, nowhere close on one of his last perimeter looks. But for Kyrie Irving, who also hoisted a couple from beyond the arc too, I just thought at some point, you got to shut that down. You got to try to attack. You got to go to something different. It's not a criticism of Kyrie Irving, the same way that you wouldn't critique what Kevin Durant was doing if he struggled in an area of his game here, because at a certain point, it's on your shoulders, Kevin Durant, on both of your shoulders, Kyrie Irving, and you're just trying to find one of those, step into it, rhythm looks. By the way, Kyrie Irving had some more amazing acrobatic moves in and around the basket. That jab step back around the perimeter, creating space for himself. So it's not a criticism on Kyrie Irving. It's just when you look at it from a game standpoint, 2 players combining 1 of 16 from beyond the arc is gonna hurt you. And it really is unfortunate, because beyond that, you go inside the bench here. It's an off night for Joe Harris, 1 of 5 from the field, 0 of 2 from beyond the arc. I want to know what the strategy is here. I think that the defensive assignments, the size of Chicago at certain positions was going to be tricky. We talk about switching DeRozan onto some of the guards. Even switching DeRozan and having him be on Joe Harris is going to create problems and foul trouble for Joe in those instances as well. So I get staying away from him. The surprising thing for me was maybe we're on the cusp of Seth Curry picking it back up here and kind of taking over some of that scoring role that you need in the supporting unit if Royce O'Neal is potentially heading for a bit of a cold spell. Now, I bring it up because in this game, he goes 8 of 11, obviously, 6 of 7 from beyond the arc. Without him, this actually could have been a bit of a blowout, because nobody else is providing any scoring support behind Kevin Durant and behind Kyrie Irving in this game. He was 6 of 12 in the previous one against San Antonio, 4 of 7 from deep there. But prior to that, going back into December, it was relatively quiet games for him, right? Had the one big performance against Golden State, 4 of 6 from the field overall, but only 1 of 3 from beyond the arc, right? 1 of 4, 0 of 1, 1 of 3 from deep. Really, in the month of December, he shot just 31% from beyond the arc. So he was not having a good month. He had not had a big stretch of successful perimeter shooting, being an impact player. And we've talked about him before, just in terms of being a smaller guy on the smaller side. He's a defensive liability. I thought he showed energy. He showed effort. He gave you everything he had defensively, even if it wasn't always good enough. He was as locked in as anybody in this game, and he did his best to try to pull them back over. So hopefully these last 2 games are a sign of things to come for Seth Curry on that end. My last closeout thought on this is, 1, it's just a loss. That's the best part of it. Doug and I talked about it on the last episode of the Nets have built up enough, equity in this winning streak and in these games to say, hey, we were off that night, right? The supporting cast wasn't there and clicking. It's okay. Again, I'll look at the rotations and say, could I have wanted an earlier pull maybe for Royce O'Neal with the lack of the shooting performance in this one? Sure. I don't know who you go to there at that point. I'm maybe a little surprised, and I did want to take a quick look at this. Edmund Sumner only plays 4 minutes in this game. And if we go inside, and this now can be just a part of the ebb and flow, because we have seen this with consistency now from Jacques Vaughn, where certain guys get pushed into bigger roles, they get pulled back, and there is an ebb and flow there. But 4 minutes tonight in this game, 10 minutes against San Antonio, 15 against Charlotte. It seems like he's destined for about that 15-minute mark. But I do think, again, the assignments are going to be difficult. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He does have pretty good length. And I actually think offensively, if we're going to talk about trying to do something different, bringing in guys that can just maybe get a little bit more downhill, attack at the basket, maybe draw some fouls. Listen, the Chicago Bulls did a great job collapsing in and around the basket, really congesting things. So this isn't me saying, hey, that would have been the solution. But sometimes I think when some things like Royce O'Neal are clearly not working, it's okay just to try something different. The only other side of that, as I mentioned with a Joe Harris or even with a Curry, It's when you make a move like that, what are you sacrificing defensively? And in a game where you gave up 69 points in the first half, it did come down to you need to find a way to get stops. If the Brooklyn Nets aren't going to lock in on that end, then it's not going to matter the success that you're having on the other end of the floor. And that's evident by the performance from Kevin Durant and still finding yourself on the losing end of one that, again, maybe in the closing moments there, last 335, there were a couple of a Kyrie Irving triple, a Royce O'Neal triple. Seth Curry knocked down a couple, but there was a couple of misses that could have made it a 4-point game, could have maybe made it a 2-possession kind of game. Instead, they don't fall. So you pack it up, you move on. The Brooklyn Nets are not going to hang their head around losing this particular game. I think you want to get right back on track here. You understand what was kind of at stake there a little bit because you could have been in a virtual tie there with the Boston Celtics, just a half game back from them. So you could have picked that up, but you're right in the hunt. It's the new year. I think what you want to look at now for the Brooklyn Nets is taking a look at that schedule, understanding what comes up here. Little disappointing with Zion Williamson having that injury. Probably not going to see him on Friday. But remember now, this is kind of the little start here. A 3-game road trip, Pelicans and the Heat coming up next. And then you come home for Boston, come home for a surprising OKC team that just blew out Boston the other night. And then you're going to go on the road for the Spurs, the Suns, and the Jazz, as well as the Warriors and Philadelphia. So there's a lot of road games built in here. You put these wins in place to maybe battle some teams, to have some difficult tests, and find yourself playing slightly above 500 ball over the next 7 to 10 games. So it's all good. I don't take much away from it other than saying you got beat up on the interior. You gave up too many second chance opportunities, and ultimately the supporting cast did not find a way to help Kevin Durant overcome the Chicago Bulls. We will be back in tomorrow, Doug Norrie and myself. And then, as we know, that Friday game coming up against the Pelicans. Just more tests, man. That's all you can really ask for. The quote, we'll leave the quote as being, I got a text message from a friend. I won't mention who it was, but he said, "You're a turtle on a fence." And what's, gosh, I'm going to screw this all up here, but essentially, the turtle, what's the most impressive or interesting is that the turtle didn't get up there by himself. So Jacques Vaughn, the NBA Eastern Conference Coach of the Month, he essentially said, hey, I'm here doing it with my other coaches, with the players. Success is a group effort, as is defeat, as is losses, right? So you win as a team, you lose as a team. Hopefully the Nets rebounded here. And essentially, without my co-host Doug, there is no quote short of saying, I miss my friend. And I can't wait till he's back so we can keep talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. All right. And by the way, obviously follow us over on YouTube, get the podcast on that feed wherever you do, because here we are in the post-podcast podcast. Doug Norrie took care of this on the last one there. We welcome everybody in fire it off, as we always say, at Locked On Nets. If you have a question, a comment, etc. Already see welcoming in Afro Buzz, welcoming in everybody else. We got Sunset in here. We've got, what we got there. It's been a bad biased officiating I didn't like. Yeah, I think did someone say here too, so many bad calls tonight both ways. Yeah, I think, we can talk about it. I didn't want to not waste, but spend a lot of time inside of the actual episode discussing the bad refereeing. I think one of the funny things about it is in the first half felt much more like the Nets were getting beat up on these calls. But then you turn around and the third quarter kind of starts out with, they're good calls, whatever the case may be. But then all of a sudden it's a handful of calls going the Brooklyn Nets way. And I think that's always the hardest part about when referees are putting their hands on the game a little bit. Listen, if you're calling fouls both ways and it's happening at a consistent rate, then it's all good. Because, hey, all right, they're playing a little bit soft calls here, fine. But that breaks up a rhythm. It impacts the way things go. Yuta Watanabe is the prime example, obviously, with the fouls that he picks up and then not being able to be available. But for the Brooklyn Nets, a team that wants to play at pace, that wants to get out and run, it becomes that much more harder and more difficult when you're getting bogged down on some of these calls. And then it also does diminish a little bit of the intensity that the team wants to bring, especially on the defensive end. Ben Simmons trying to play in those passing lanes, trying to be disruptive. Well, that gets broken down a little bit when you're getting a couple of ticky-tack fouls like we saw him have a little bit more earlier in the season. So it was a frustration for sure. What do we got here? Trade Cam Thomas, Dayron, or Kessler for Nas Reed. Yeah, I mean, listen, you can certainly talk about it. I don't know though, like I like Nas Reed if we're talking about it in that backup, thicker body guy that can come in. I don't have a problem with suggesting it. I just don't know if he has value as being kind of the safety valve on his current team in case one of the bigs goes down. So there's a little bit, sometimes it's easy to point and say we need it. But at this point right now, I'm less concerned about these things. And it's actually one of the things I thought about bringing up inside the episode as well is just that there's going to come a time about a month from now as the deadline approaches where we'll start to think about it a little bit more, right? We'll start to look at some of those players that are available. What are teams that are falling off? Who are sellers? Who are buyers? What's the buyout market going to look like? But by and large, I'm not going to come out of this game at least and now dive back into those waters, right? And I'm not suggesting that you are, Tommy, but just that there's still a lot of time here. There's still a lot of games to be played out here before we go diving into those waters. Not that it's not valid to bring it up. Jamal, what do you got? Since we went on a 12-game winning streak, people are expecting to never lose. Like you're going to end up losing. Yeah, exactly. And again, that's why I said at the top of the show, I'll reiterate it here. Like that is what it feels like. It just feels like you're not going to win every single game, every single night. You feel like you can. You feel like you should. But if you lose one, there's no reason to overreact to it in the same way that I think Doug and I have spent this kind of winning streak in the month of December in a lot of ways, looking at it and going, hey, it's a cumulative excitement that we've built up. It wasn't one game that put you over the top, although handling the Milwaukee Bucks certainly felt great, right? A test game like that. But it's the cumulative impact of also just blowing out bad teams, having dominant wins, being able to rest Kevin Durant in fourth quarters of games, right? Those things matter as much as anything else that's going to go on. So I think that it's important to also remember that as well. We need a big. This game is proof. Maybe Big Rube. Maybe it's proof. Again, I would prefer if from that narrative standpoint, I'd prefer that the Nets play a really good game and have the bigs of another team be the key component that led to them losing. That wasn't the case tonight. There's a dozen other things. It was a bad game from them. Like it was a bad overall performance. So it's really hard for me to look at that coming out of this game and say, this is proof that they need to go get player X, because it was just an overall bad night from everyone except from essentially Kevin Durant. And actually, you can even put Nicholas Claxton as having a mostly good game in this one on the offensive end, going both ways, but it just wasn't a great game overall for the team. We've got the Nets are very good, but I'm curious to see what happens with Ben Simmons in the playoffs. He was just a brutal watch on offense. Yeah, I mean, listen, it wasn't a good one for him in and around the basket. Couldn't get his finishes to go down. Certainly, that was a big factor in the, played a role in this one, I should say. And I do think that in games like these, and Doug and I will talk about this more because there's also some stuff that's been coming out from Jacques Vaughn, Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton, how they function together, what the intention is there, and what the long-term goal is there. So we'll talk about that probably tomorrow, because it'll be, this will be going up on Thursday on the podcast feed. But our Friday show ahead of that game against the Pelicans, I think we'll talk a little bit about Ben Simmons and his functionality. Now, in a game like this, there is a component where you say, hey, if some of the other supporting cast isn't there, you'd like to be able to look to a Ben Simmons and say, get on the offensive end, get on the front foot, attack at the basket. Now, we know there's the issue maybe with trying to avoid, doesn't want to have to go to the foul line, but finish, right? Finish at the basket. Don't worry about the fouls. Don't worry about getting to the free throw line. Just finish at the basket. And some of that, especially when we think about the way this team is constructed, ends up coming down to the idea of, if you have Nicholas Claxton who can get out in the space and he can run the floor, did such a good job of gathering some great passes from Kyrie Irving early in this game, finishing around the basket, using his offhand, etc. But he's not the physical going to the lane guy. He's shown flashes of being able to go in and attack at the basket like that. But Ben Simmons, he's the bull in the china shop. And if he can drive into the teeth of defenses a handful of times and reward the team and himself by scoring, that can impact a little bit the spacing. You can start to be a little bit more defensively focused on him and just open up some other things. So I'm not going to drag him on it, but I will say that it is fair to look at it and understand um, that his offensive consistency to whatever level it is, you do need that. You do need that to make teams adjust a little bit. And again, especially in a game when you're not getting great supporting cast performances, that's when, in theory, we talk about it being Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Ben Simmons. Well, then Ben Simmons needs to step up in that moment for this team. Um, Yeah, I know. Yeah, actually, I will point out, I know there was the bad turnover there. He had a bad turnover on a dead ball trying to inbounds as well, where he was looking, I think, for Royce O'Neal to fade away towards the far sideline. He ends up just kind of lobbing it there. No communication. There was also one late. Again, it was a sloppy game. Like it was not lackadaisical, just out of rhythm, out of sync. That's really what it felt like to me. And it's okay. It's okay for those little, again, it's okay for those things to happen, the little miscommunications, but you can look back at the game and say, one, two, three, four, five, six. Here's 6 moments, right, that really start to unravel things and disrupt. Don't forget, didn't mention in the episode, 13-5 run by Kevin Durant all onto his own to close out the half to try to keep the Nets inside of this one. You're going to highlight that and talk about it and mention how big that was and critical it was if the Nets come back. Instead, it does end up falling into that category of, 13 points at the end of the second quarter that end up not amounting to a win for the Brooklyn Nets. So, but it does add to the disappointment a little bit there too. How you feel about us playing Sumner more this game and changing the fourth rotation? Yeah, I mentioned that. I mentioned that briefly there in the episode. Again, when this isn't so much about that I think Edmund Sumner could have been better in this game. I mean, listen, 0 of 8 from beyond the arc for Royce O'Neal. Anything might have been better. But my point being is, I don't know that this is a great matchup for Edmund Sumner per se, but when Royce is struggling, it's okay to throw it somewhere else. It's okay to give a shot and see what happens. I think, again, the balance is about the size. There's a lot of thick bodies for Chicago, and I think Jacques Vaughn is probably trying to balance that on the defensive end. And then maybe on top of that is, as Seth Curry is knocking down some of his perimeter shots, you kind of end up getting caught in this space of, well, okay, we're going to put Seth Curry out there more, but we got to keep Kyrie Irving out there. Now we're into that small backcourt situation, and that's where now you want to keep Royce out there for defensive purposes. So it's a delicate balancing act there. I would have been fine seeing more of Edmund Sumner in this game, but I can understand why you never end up getting there, because you needed stops in this game. You gave up 121 points. You had to find a way to manufacture stops. Maybe there's something in that third going to that fourth quarter, specifically the fourth quarter, where maybe I don't need any Royce O'Neal minutes in the fourth. Maybe I just try to go with something else. I try to rely on Claxton and Simmons and Durant defensively, and I try to get someone out there for a spark. So from that standpoint, I'm not against it. I think even at that point, though, if you're talking about making a switch, for me, it's actually going to end up being probably Royce O'Neal out and Joe Harris in, even though he wasn't having a great shooting night. Sumner's not a great pure three-point shooter, so I'm going to look to have somebody on there that can knock down these shots from the outside to add with Seth Curry. So that, I'm probably going to go that route as I'm bringing Ben and Claxton in and out of the lineups here. Give me Kevin Durant, Nicholas Claxton, Kyrie Irving, Seth Curry, and Joe Harris. Just give me an extra guy that maybe, as we know, has the track record of being a great three-point shooter. I'm doing a little bit of double look here between my secondary camera and my primary camera right now. So there's a good chance that I've been waxing poetic off into the distance here. Hopefully not inside the podcast, but certainly inside the bonus one here. What else do we got? Oh, maybe a hot take. Okay, Stokes. Maybe a hot take, but I love how Royce kept firing up those shots from three, even late in the game. That's the confidence. Yeah. Oh, well, by the way, just to be clear, he's coming off of having a very strong run for the Nets all throughout the month of December. So 100%. He missed a game, I think, it was non-COVID illness. So he might have a little bit of a little cold. Like, all right. I don't disagree with you from that standpoint. That's why I say, like, hey, would I like to see maybe go another direction? Sure. But in the same way that when Joe Harris, Seth Curry, Royce O'Neal, if Royce O'Neal wasn't pulling the trigger on those shots, it would have been Kyrie Irving. It would have been Kevin Durant saying, hey, pull the trigger. You got to take your shots when they're there for you, whether they're going to go down or not. That's the product of the system. It's the product of creating open looks. It's the product of teams throwing defenses at Kevin Durant, getting the ball out of his hands. So, yeah, again, if he's going to be in there, he's got to take the shots. 100% agree with you on that. It's just a matter of whether or not you think there's certainly a point where you say maybe we've crossed the threshold. We don't need to have him out there anymore. Let's keep firing, man. We got. I'm happy to see everybody in here, and also happy to see just a great rotation of different people, kind of thrown in here. DeRozan versus Claxton at the end of the game made it hard to stage a comeback. Not many teams, Celtics, Philly, Cavs, that have a player like him. Only guy like that is Middleton. Yeah. Again, it's that perfect combination, because early in the game, I had made the note about, from a Zach LaVine standpoint, you kind of like the Claxton and the Kevin Durant. You like having those guys to switch on and off and pass off a player that isn't necessarily fast, but is lengthy and can get at the basket. Like, you liked that because it meant you kind of keep him in front of you and make him settle into some mid-range looks. That was a good thing. DeRozan, though, just that little half a step quicker, obviously can get to his spots. But again, he did a lot of his work in the fourth quarter of this one. I didn't look at one single matchup outside of, again, and I know people are going to say, we saw in the comments, this is a game where this is the reason you need to get a big. Again, I looked at it more as positioning and functionality on the defensive end, denying the entry pass, as opposed to the fact that you couldn't just straight up be physical with some of these guys. We've seen Simmons, we've seen Claxton play up against bigger players. Vucevic is not a massive player by any stretch. I just thought that they did a good job, Chicago, of setting up the offense, getting into their sets early, creating pockets and openings there. And again, you got to remember, you have LaVine, you have DeRozan. So, are they Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving? No, but they are two high level talents that you have to respect. So the way in which those matchups play out, Vucevic is going to be the beneficiary a lot of times. And then you throw in Williams, who knocks down a few perimeter looks, and all of a sudden you're worried about those outside shots and you're trying to kind of scramble a little bit. And I just thought the communication was bad on the defensive end in this game. But I think I think to your point, it's a good matchup for the Bulls. It's a difficult assignment for Claxton. He's answered that bell time and time again. And this was just a night where, again, I think he could have answered it fine, if not for the fact that you were already down, trailing by 10, 12, 7 points throughout the second half of this game. That made it hard. What else do we got here? Jamal, fire another one off here. I'm looking forward to seeing how they play against Boston, because I know they'll be locked in and we want to see how they perform. Yeah, 100%. That's something else that we had brought up. Doug and I said, you can look at these schedules, and obviously, like, you answered the bell a couple of times, against a couple of the better teams in the league. That was important. But you can lose games against Boston. You can lose games against good teams. They can be battles. By the way, you could have lost this game tonight, and you just say, hey, good game from Chicago. They outperformed you. They made the shots late when it mattered most. You take the loss, and you still have a lot of positive to take away from it. This one just felt like, clunky performance, right? You didn't put out, this was a C minus performance from the Brooklyn Nets overall. It was an A plus from Kevin Durant, but it was an overall, a muddling average performance from the team. And that's where I think it's disappointing, because you want to look at any game, regardless of the opponent, and just say, are we playing good basketball? And this was an example where I don't think they played particularly good basketball. Afro Buzz. Don't you think JV was deliberate about leaving Royce in, whether or not he would eventually hit shots just for continuity and establishing? Yeah, probably. And I think, we've talked about guys that have been in and out, and then Joe Harris gets in there. I think it was deliberate. Again, I think the starting lineup was deliberate. I think the rotations were deliberate. And I think that Royce O'Neal over the month of December has earned that, right? So he's earned a bad night. So 100%. And if you want to look at it from that standpoint, you can say he's earned his role, and an off shooting night is not going to be the reason why you pull the plug on him. I hesitate a little bit, again, because of the personnel you have. It's not about, so if Royce was, even if he was 0 of 6 from the field, when you can, because he's shooting poorly from the perimeter, and that's specifically what you needed in the second half of this game to close the gap, that's where I get a little bit of a push and pull. But I think, but I think about, he's been so good for such a big stretch for the Nets. He's afforded to have a bad game. By the way, we talked about this with Joe Harris at the start of the year, when everyone was clamoring and saying, you got to get rid of him. He's a disaster. He's got to be buried, all those things. you trust the track record. And Royce doesn't have that same track record from beyond the arc, but he's developing a track record with this team of being a consistent player on both ends of the floor in his role. So I'm good with that. Let's tap in with Hey Blah. What are your thoughts about that call for the Bulls when Sumner hit the ball on Io? Yeah, it was out on Io. That's what I think. I believe I can't remember the ref's name. He's a younger guy. He was looking for help from some of the veterans across the court. And those things are going to happen. I think he missed it. Yeah, I think there was a handful of calls in this game that if you wanted to look at it with a critical eye, you'd say, boy, those missed opportunities. But the one thing that I don't think I mentioned inside of the episode either was if we go back and look at, I didn't take a look at where the turnovers were in this game for the Nets. And by the way, like they don't even be that high, but they were like really bad turnovers. Really, yeah. I mean, so the Nets only have 11 turnovers in this game. They might as well have been 30 because they were such critical ones. It was mentioned in here, talking about the inbounds play from Kyrie has another careless turnover. I think Kevin Durant had one or two in this game as well. You had Royce O'Neal trying to outlet like a secondary extra pass doesn't quite get there. You had a couple of times in the paint, Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton getting that congestion and trying to find the outlet pass. I mean, honestly, again, after Kevin Durant, the only other guy that looked like he was just in his mode, Kyrie Irving had it for stretches in this game, but I think kind of faded as it went on. It was Seth Curry. He was the only other guy, and I'll say Nicholas Claxton too. He had a very consistent game for you. It just again when things aren't working, on all cylinders, you kind of look at him and say, well, can you be even better defensively? I mean, he had back-to-back blocks on over the course of 3 or 4 possessions, so he stepped up in a couple of key moments there. Took the charging foul on Vucevic at the top of the key as well. But Curry was the only guy that looked comfortable. So I do think it's part of it. But yeah, that was 100%. That was out on Chicago. Should have been a Nets ball, and that's a key little moment that certainly you wanted to be better. It is a good one here. Yuta Watanabe gave you 6 minutes, 1 rebound, 1 assist, and 1 point. That's not enough for someone who has a big role. Yeah, yeah. Again, well, they could, but they flat out couldn't though. Kenji. I mean, you can choose to play him through it. It was just one of those nights for Yuta. Comes in, 1 foul, fine. 2 of the 3 fouls seemed ticky tack straight up and down on one of them. Really touchy calls. Okay, fine. 3 minutes, 3 fouls. You got to bring him out because you can't risk him getting his 4th foul in the first half of the game. When he finally comes back in the second half, picks up his 4th foul, and you could see it on his face. It was one of those nights for him where the foul calls were going to find him. So Jacques Vaughn tried to save him and then use him in the key spot. And unfortunately, it just was not going to be a night where you're going to get anything out of him. Now you can say, let him foul himself out of this game. I could hear that, certainly. But again, I keep coming back to, it was one of those games for a lot of players. It was one of those games for the team overall where they just didn't have it. I just didn't feel like they had it tonight. I'm scrolling through to see if we get anything else. But yeah, other than that, though, again, Friday night's going to be the Pelicans. You're going to have the Heat. You're going to have Boston. Mentioned there, when we look at the schedule, remember, this is the start of the 3-game road trip for the Brooklyn Nets. And then after they come back for those, I think it's just 2 home games. So they're going to go and finish this off with the Pelicans and the Heat. They'll come back for Boston and Oklahoma City. And then they're going to have that 5-game road trip that'll take them from the 17th to the 25th. So they'll play 5 games across those 8 days. So it's going to be a lot. There are 1 back-to-back in it right in the middle. So they'll play San Antonio, and then they'll play a back-to-back Phoenix and then Utah. So they'll be, it's not big travel, but it will be a back-to-back there. And then they'll play Golden State. They get a nice big break which actually nice because it means they get to come all the way back probably to Brooklyn if they want to before going down to Philly. And then they have a 3-game homestand. So this is an interesting stretch here for this team because you get these 3 road games. So you'll play 8 out of your next 10 are going to be on the road. But then when you come back, they get a great one. And we mentioned this. Chicago they'll play it after the deadline. The last game before the deadline is going to be Phoenix on February 7th. But after they come back from that road trip, they're going to get 3 games at home. They'll go to Boston, and then they'll come home for 5 more. So they're going to play 8 out of 9 games at home, starting from the January 26th against Detroit all the way through the 76ers on February 11th. So it's going to be interesting, right? Keep your head above water, play some difficult teams here, take a road trip, come back slightly above 500 on that trip, and then look to continue to dominate on your home court, right? So that's got to be just kind of the way they approach this, I think. If anybody else doesn't have anything, we'll probably close it. That was a later game, later tip-off, combined with that fluky issue with the scoreboard behind the one basket there they had to resolve too. So you get that later tip-off, and then you also get a little bit of confusion there around the scoreboard, and all of a sudden it's 11:30 on a Wednesday night. All right. I think we will pack it in there, my friends. Thank you to everybody that joins on for these. We noticed that the numbers in the lives are a little bit lower when there isn't the winning for the Brooklyn Nets. When the streak comes to an end, everyone takes a reprieve. But that's why when I look out and I see everybody who was in here from Afro Buzz, we talk about DJ, we talk about Half Dead Quest, everybody in there, all some of the usual suspects as well. Thank you. We always appreciate it, man. These post-game episodes, doing them live, they're so much better when you guys are in here interacting, commenting, not just with us, but having conversations with one another as well, obviously. We will be back in tomorrow, Doug and I, so that'll be Friday's episode, talking about, again, we'll talk about that Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton tandem, what the goal is here, and why over these next maybe 10 to 15 games, we might start to see Jacques Vaughn implement what he wants to be the long-term picture here. So when someone says, I saw some mentionings about when it comes to playoffs and expectations, I think we're going to start to see what the plan is. We'll see how it works, but Doug will drill down some of those numbers for us. We already mentioned in the last episode how good this team has been on both ends of the floor. And so we will talk about that going into Friday and that game against the Pelicans. Thank you very much to Khan. Thank you to Kyrie there. Appreciate the kind words, guys. Keep it up, man. Keep supporting us. We'll keep supporting you, the Brooklyn Nets faithful. And we'll back again next time talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.